I'm going to get into that with you in a moment, but I think it's important that we face what the real numbers are. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says what they call the real unemployment number for April, which again includes people who are not looking for work or underemployed, is 22.8%. But again, that does not include, because the unemployment numbers for April stopped in mid-April, does not include the 7 million people who have lost their jobs since then. So aren't we talking close to 25% at this point, which is Great Depression neighborhood?
Chris, we could be, but let me just emphasize, unlike the Great Depression, where you had economic issues that led to this, we closed down the economy. So it wouldn't be a surprise if you closed down the economy that in half of the workforces, half the people didn't work. And that's why we're very focused on rebuilding this economy and getting it back to where it was. This is no fault of American business. This is no fault of American workers. This is a result of a virus. And that's why the president and I were determined to put together the largest economic program ever to help American workers get through this. So you are correct. The reported numbers are probably going to get worse before they get better. But that's why we're focused on rebuilding this economy. We'll have a better third quarter. We'll have a better fourth quarter. And next year is going to be a great year.
Well, let's talk about that, because you and the president both say the economy is going to come roaring back. But I got to tell you, and I want to ask you about a number of signs which indicate that the recovery is going to be much slower than that, sir. Job losses are not just in the hospitality industry, airlines, restaurants, as you would expect, but they're more widespread. The white-collar and government sector, 3 million jobs lost. Major retailers like Neiman Marcus and J. Crew declaring bankruptcy, and the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says unemployment at the end, not of this year, but of 2021, will still be 9.5%. Question, are your rosy predictions based on economic reality or the November election?
Chris, let me just emphasize, first of all, these numbers impact real people, and I want to emphasize we understand what this is, how this is impacting real people. So they're not just numbers, it's impacting real people. My numbers aren't rosy. What I've said is you're going to have a very, very bad second quarter, and then I think you're going to see a bounce back from a low standpoint. None of the economic models have ever worked in predicting what happens when you close down due to medical reasons. So my predictions are based upon what I see as the rate of reopening in a careful way. It's also based upon my views, and I've personally heard from many of the doctors that have vaccines and virals in trials and their expectations of being able to get a vaccine by the end of this year and having real viral treatments. The advent of testing, all these things are going to help give American business and American workers the confidence to reopen in a careful and a deliberate way.
So you just heard the clip from U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin on Sunday on Chris Wallace's show on Fox News, talking about the jobless claims and unemployment, how it could get worse for the next quarter or two, but he expects it to be a lot better by the end of this year and also in 2021. He tends to be more optimistic in the interview in the rest of the piece. Now let's actually dive into some of the actual numbers here on the slides. This slide shows that over the last 7 weeks, over 33 million Americans have filed jobless claims. It's an absolutely enormous sum, especially compared to 2008. This is the story that had that chart from the last slide. But what is interesting is what I pulled out of the article there. However, continuing claims are those who have filed within at least the last 2 weeks and are still on the unemployment rolls rose 4.6 million to 22.6 million. So a lot of that is being left out of the coverage. So people who are spinning this, that was the worst of the numbers, that part is being left out. How the amount of Americans that are still on unemployment for weeks now since the filings started, the massive amounts of filings, that is still rising. So that is being left out of a lot of the headlines. And a lot of the people are spinning that all the bad news, all the bad numbers are in the past. This is another article that came out besides the jobless claims. This was the April jobs report, and it showed a record for a single month, 20.5 million payrolls, were cut. Unemployment rate jumps to 14.7. I will show with the shadow stats numbers and other research that this number is misleading. Hidden in the article, the actual decline in payrolls for the month was by far the worst on record, not just in 2008, ever. The largest on record, the worst on record ever. Again, this is a chart that shows how bad things were, and these are not the real numbers. So this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I will show in future slides that a lot of stuff was not counted, that things were much, much worse than this. There was another article that came out this past week. Which U.S. states have been hit the hardest? I think disproportionately a lot of bricks and mortar retailers, restaurants, and hospitality and tourism, and also cruise ships were hurt a lot. But this article goes through that Georgia, Florida, and Alabama were the three states that have showed the biggest spikes in unemployment jobless claims. So Georgia had an absolutely enormous spike, and so has Florida and Alabama. This chart shows the amount of unemployments by state so far. This is a chart I found from the chartstore.com that Jim Bianco of Bianco Research was sharing. These are some really great charts. So Bureau of Labor Statistics digging further into the data. So this shows the comparison here of the 14.75 unemployment rate. But again, this is not the real number, but look how much larger it is compared to past recessions and depressions. This is U6, which John Williams of Shadow Stats likes to talk about, but the mainstream media does not like to talk about. U6 is total unemployed, plus people who are underemployed, who are not working jobs who are working much lower paying jobs than they're qualified. For example, the highly paid white collar worker who is now a delivery driver for Instacart for groceries. That would be something like now, or is now delivering food for DoorDash, or one of those other food delivery services or grocery store delivery services. So this is a much wider range, and this says that the real unemployment rate, and the numbers were a lot larger in 2010 than the mainstream media was reporting, but this shows that the U6 number was actually over 22%, so an enormous amount. And look at the comparison to how low things were in December 2019. But again, I don't think this is the real number either, but this is a lot closer. Finally, we get to Shadow Stats. John Williams of Shadow Stats, he uses the old U.S. government, Federal Reserve, and Bureau of Labor Statistics formulas that were far more accurate. And these formulas, they used to be more honest about inflation. They used to be more honest about unemployment. Now it is in the government, all these government's incentives to lie about the amount of inflation, to lie about the amount of unemployed, because of cost of living adjustments for inflation. So the higher inflation rate that the federal government reports, the more they have to pay out in cost of living adjustments to Social Security, people receiving Social Security, and people on government employee pensions. So it is in their incentive to lie about these numbers. So according to John Williams of Shadow Stats, the headline number of U3 is 14.71. However, he says that the more proper U3 accounting per the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that the real unemployment was 19.5%, up a lot from just March. And here's a chart of the scariest thing I've found in any of my research for the jobless claims and unemployment rates. According to John Williams of Shadow Stats, alternate unemployment for April 2020, 35.4%. But there was a lot larger in 2010 than the mainstream media let on. So things were really bad in 2008, 2009, 2010, but the spike is just absolutely enormous in just the last couple months. The real unemployment, according to John Williams of Shadow Stats, is over 35% of adult Americans. Finally, we get to the last slide here in this short little video. I put a lot of charts and graphs together in a short amount of time to show you that the real unemployment rate, the amount of jobless claims is striking in just the last 7 weeks, and we might not be done because there are a lot more firms that did not get SBA loans. There is a lot of corruption. A lot of listeners are reaching out to me that they own small businesses and still haven't gotten SBA loans, or things have been delayed for a very, very long time. They're at the back of the line. They're trying. And even if small business owners do get SBA loans, there are a lot of employees now that are making more money not working. I've heard tons of stories anecdotally from small business owners who listened to my podcast and reached out to me and told me that a lot of their former employees are now making $600 more per week watching porn, playing video games than actually working. We have tremendous amounts of disincentives here where a small business owner trying to hire back their employees now has to compete with someone who has filed for unemployment and is now making, in certain cases, certain states, $600 more per week. So there is now a disincentive for people to actually go back to their jobs. And this story here is interesting. This was a poll conducted. This was a Washington Post article this week. And it said, even though 33 million Americans lost their jobs in the last 7 weeks and have filed for unemployment, a striking amount in polling, 77%, almost 80% believe that they will get their jobs back. So do you think, comment below the video, do you think that this is naivete? Do you think that this is hopium? Or are you optimistic that in the coming months, jobs will come back? Because at the beginning of the interview, Steve Mnuchin, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, is optimistic that jobs will eventually come back and that the economy can easily be restarted. Call me skeptical on that. I am not as optimistic that the U.S. economy can easily be restarted, especially for many businesses in certain industries. It is not that easy to restart a lot of different businesses from shutting them down very quickly and then restarting them very quickly. It's going to be a very slow and painful process. And businesses like restaurants, if you run the restaurant, and I've discussed this at length now for a while in videos and interviews with Mark Faber, interviews with Peter Bookvar, other experts, if you restart a restaurant and the restaurant does not have a good takeout or delivery business, and a politician or government bureaucrat decreeing that the restaurant can only have 20% capacity, 25% capacity, 30% capacity, the economics of the restaurant do not work. So we'll see what happens, but I'm pretty shocked how optimistic so many Americans are that their jobs will be back in only a couple months.